Here's something that almost nobody in the American media is covering properly. While Donald Trump spent the past several weeks threatening Canada with 25% tariffs, calling it a future American state, and treating its prime minister like a regional governor who needed to fall in line, Mark Carney was quietly doing something that may redefine North American trade relationships for a generation. And by the time Washington realized what had happened, it was already done. Reports surfacing this week confirm that Canada has locked in a sweeping trade and economic cooperation framework with the European Union. Energy corridors, critical mineral agreements, technology partnerships, preferential trade arrangements, long-term supply commitments, all of it signed, structured, and pointed directly away from the United States. The timing is not a coincidence. It's the strategy. Carney didn't fire back at Trump's threats. He didn't schedule a press conference to denounce tariff talk. He didn't ask for a meeting. He picked up the phone and called Brussels. Who is Mark Carney exactly? To understand why this matters, you have to understand who Trump was actually dealing with, because it wasn't the kind of politician Trump usually runs over. Mark Carney served as governor of the Bank of Canada and then governor of the Bank of England. He helped steer two of the world's most consequential financial institutions through some of the most turbulent economic conditions of the past half-century. He has personal relationships with finance ministers, central bankers, and heads of government across every major economic bloc on Earth. When Trump was threatening tariffs and calling Canada economically dependent, he was talking to a man who has forgotten more about sovereign economic strategy than most sitting heads of government will ever learn. Trump assumed he was dealing with someone who would negotiate under pressure. He was actually dealing with someone who had already decided not to negotiate at all. What Canada just secured the agreement with the EU positions Canada as Europe's anchor partner for North American energy supply. That means liquefied natural gas. That means the critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements, that are the backbone of electric vehicles, green energy infrastructure, and next-generation technology manufacturing. Europe has been urgently seeking stable alternatives to Russian energy since the Ukraine war exposed the catastrophic vulnerability of that dependence. Canada just became the answer to that problem. The deal also includes provisions insulating Canadian exporters from third-party tariff disruptions, which is a polished diplomatic way of saying that even if Trump does follow through on his threats, the framework creates mechanisms to reroute around the damage. Canadian companies have European buyers now. European countries have guaranteed supply. The leverage Trump thought he had over Canadian trade policy has been significantly reduced, possibly eliminated. And then there's the technology dimension. Joint research initiatives in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and green technology, coordinated regulatory standards, talent exchange programs. Canada and the EU are not just signing a trade agreement, they are constructing an integrated innovation ecosystem that spans the Atlantic, with the United States positioned outside of it. The strategic logic. Think about what Trump's approach was supposed to accomplish. The theory was that Canada, which sends the majority of its exports to the United States, would have no choice but to accept whatever terms Washington demanded. The economic dependency was real. The leverage seemed obvious. What Trump's team apparently failed to account for was that Canada also has what Europe desperately needs: third largest oil reserves in the world, immense natural gas capacity, the mineral stockpiles that modern technology supply chains depend on, a stable, rule-of-law government with a track record of honoring long-term commitments. Europe didn't need convincing. It needed an invitation. Carney provided one. By making Canada indispensable to European energy security and technology development, he fundamentally altered the negotiating equation. Canada no longer needs to win a tariff fight with the United States. It just needs to ensure that the cost of American economic aggression falls largely on American consumers and businesses, while Canadian companies absorb the blow with revenue flowing in from elsewhere. That's exactly what this framework accomplishes. what Trump actually created. There is a bitter irony at the center of this story. Trump's tariff threats, designed to force Canadian submission, instead triggered the most significant Canadian pivot away from American economic integration in modern history. Every LNG export terminal now being planned for European delivery represents infrastructure investment, employment, and long term revenue that American energy policy will not be able to access on favorable terms. Every technology partnership forged between Canadian and European firms creates regulatory standards, supply chains, and market access arrangements that leave American companies competing from the outside. Every critical mineral agreement signed with European buyers is a supply line that American manufacturers will have to bid against at market rates without the preferential access that decades of integrated North American trade had provided. Trump wanted to demonstrate American dominance over its largest trading partner. What he demonstrated instead was that threatening allies accelerates their search for alternatives. The response. That wasn't. One detail stands out in everything that's been reported. When Trump apparently attempted to contact Carney directly after news of the EU agreement broke, the Prime Minister's office issued a statement indicating that he was occupied with existing international commitments and that American inquiries would be handled through standard diplomatic channels. That is not an accident. It is a message delivered in the language of statecraft. You do not get to bully your way to the front of the line. You will be treated like any other party. You will go through the process. Carney has also pointedly avoided any public triumphalism. There have been no victory speeches, no pointed comparisons to Trump's approach, no press events celebrating the deal as a geopolitical win over Washington. His public statements have been focused on what Canadians and Europeans gain, not on what the United States loses. This, too, is deliberate. A public humiliation of Trump creates an incentive for irrational escalation. A quiet, competent reconfiguration of the economic landscape creates a new reality that has to be accepted, regardless of how anyone feels about it. The cascade effect. Canada did not sign this agreement in a vacuum. Japan has been watching. South Korea has been watching. Australia has reportedly made contact about coordinating approaches to trade diversification. Mexico is paying close attention. Every mid-sized economy that has been on the receiving end of American economic pressure is now looking at what Canada accomplished in a matter of weeks and asking the same question. If Canada can do this, what can we do? The answer is that any country with valuable resources, stable governance, and strategic positioning can pursue something similar. Canada just proved the model works. Others will adapt it. The result will be a world economy that is more networked, more distributed, and less anchored around Washington's preferences, not because America chose to step back, but because its behavior made the step backward inevitable. What this means for Canadians, for ordinary Canadians, this agreement represents something genuinely significant: reduced vulnerability. When one trading partner represents the majority of your export market, that partner has enormous leverage over your economy and therefore over your politics. Carney just started the process of changing that equation. Canadian energy workers have long-term contracts flowing toward European markets. Canadian technology companies have access to a 450 million person market with favorable terms. Canadian mining operations have committed buyers for resources that the entire global clean energy transition depends on. If Trump implements tariffs tomorrow, it will hurt, but it will not be the existential crisis it might have been 6 months ago. That is competent governance, not reactive, not performed for television cameras, quietly building the foundations that protect your country's future, regardless of what chaos arrives from next door. The verdict: Trump entered this confrontation convinced he held all the cards. He had the larger economy. He had the tariff threat. He had the assumption, shared by many, that Canada's economic integration with the United States had created a dependency that couldn't be escaped quickly enough to matter. Mark Carney, in the early weeks of his prime ministership, proved that assumption wrong. He did it without a single tariff of his own, without a hostile press conference, without a moment of the chest pounding that Trump uses as a substitute for strategy. He simply went and built something better. And now Trump faces the choice that Carney always intended to force on him: implement the tariffs and accelerate exactly the decoupling he claimed to oppose, or back down and confirm that his threats were never as powerful as he believed. Either way, the world has already seen what happened. A smaller country, led by someone who understood economics, relationships, and long-term strategic positioning, outmaneuvered the most powerful economy on Earth. Not by fighting, but by refusing to play the game at all. The partnerships being built now will outlast this administration. The infrastructure being planned will serve Canadian and European interests for decades. The model Carney has established will be studied, replicated, and expanded. That's the difference between a dealmaker and a strategist. One of them was in the room negotiating. The other had already left to go build something Trump hadn't thought to protect.